Welcome to the Think Forward podcast, where we speak with futurists, innovators, and big thinkers. Come along with your host, Steve Fisher, and explore the future together.
Welcome back to Foundations and Foresight, a Think Forward series. I'm Steve Fisher, and today we're exploring a critical aspect of futures work that can dramatically amplify its impact: cultivating organizational futures fluency. In our previous episodes, we've focused on developing your personal foresight capabilities and creating transformation roadmaps. Today, we're shifting our focus to how you can spread foresight practices throughout your organization to build collective resilience and adaptiveness. Because here's the reality: even the most brilliant futures insights won't create meaningful change if they remain isolated within a single person or a small specialized team. True organizational resilience comes when futures thinking becomes embedded in your culture, processes, and everyday decision-making across all levels. By the end of this episode, you'll have practical strategies for teaching, evangelizing, and institutionalizing foresight throughout your organization, turning futures literacy from a specialized skill into a widespread organizational capability. We'll explore how to overcome resistance, design effective learning experiences, and create the systems and culture that allow futures thinking to flourish. Let's dive in. Why organizational futures fluency matters. Before we explore how to cultivate broader futures fluency, let's clarify why it matters so much for organizational resilience and adaptation. Most organizations today operate in environments characterized by rapid change, increasing complexity, and profound uncertainty. Traditional approaches to strategy and planning, which assume relative stability and predictability, are simply insufficient in this context. Organizations need to develop new capabilities to sense emerging change, make sense of complex patterns, and adapt quickly as conditions evolve. This is where organizational futures fluency becomes essential. When futures thinking is limited to a small group of specialists or executives, several problems emerge. Detection gaps occur. A small team, no matter how skilled, has limited perceptual range. They simply can't spot all the relevant signals of change affecting different parts of the organization. Implementation barriers arise. When futures insights come only from specialized teams or outside consultants, they often face resistance from those who didn't participate in developing them. Response lags develop. If every emerging issue must be escalated to a central foresight team or executive leadership, the organization can't respond with sufficient speed to rapid changes. Learning opportunities are missed. When futures work happens in isolation, the organization doesn't build the collective intelligence and pattern recognition that comes from broad engagement with emerging possibilities. By contrast, organizations with widespread futures fluency can sense changes earlier through a distributed network of people attuned to relevant signals in their respective domains, interpret patterns more holistically by connecting insights across silos and levels, respond more nimbly because futures thinking informs decisions at all levels, not just at the top. Learn and adapt continuously as futures thinking becomes part of everyday operations rather than an occasional specialized exercise. This distributed capacity doesn't mean abandoning specialized foresight expertise. Rather, it means creating a tiered approach where most people have basic futures literacy, many have intermediate skills, and some develop advanced capabilities that support and enhance the organization's collective futures intelligence. Assessing your organization's current futures fluency. Before diving into development strategies, it's important to understand your organization's current level of futures fluency. This assessment helps you identify strengths to build upon and gaps to address. Consider these dimensions. Perceptual range. How well does your organization detect weak signals and emerging changes across relevant domains? Is scanning for change limited to a few individuals or widely distributed? Time horizon. How far into the future do people typically consider when making decisions? Are conversations predominantly about immediate concerns, or do they regularly include longer-term implications? Adaptability. How quickly can your organization adjust strategies and operations when conditions change? Are rigid plans the norm, or do you see flexible approaches that anticipate multiple possibilities? Systemic thinking. Do people see connections between different trends and domains or tend to analyze issues in isolation? Is there awareness of how changes in one area might affect others? Futures discourse. How comfortable are people discussing uncertainties, exploring multiple scenarios, and challenging assumptions about the future? Is futures terminology part of everyday conversation or viewed as specialized jargon? For each dimension, consider whether the capability exists at different levels of your organization, among senior leadership, within middle management, among frontline employees, across different functions and departments. This assessment helps you identify where your organization stands on the spectrum from futures resistant to futures fluent. Most organizations fall somewhere in the middle, perhaps with pockets of futures literacy but not widespread fluency, or with good awareness of trends but limited capacity to translate that awareness into adaptive action. Understanding your starting point allows you to design a development approach that builds on existing strengths while addressing critical gaps. Designing your futures fluency development approach. Based on your assessment, you can now design a targeted approach to developing organizational futures fluency. The most effective approaches combine 4 key elements. 1. Awareness building. Start by creating broad awareness of why futures thinking matters and what it looks like in practice. This foundational step helps overcome resistance and builds initial interest. Effective awareness building strategies include executive briefings that connect futures thinking directly to strategic priorities and business outcomes. These should be practical rather than theoretical, showing how foresight enhances decision quality and competitive positioning. Organization-wide communications that share futures concepts, emerging trends, and their relevance to your specific context. These might include newsletters, internet features, or short video segments. Trend presentations that make emerging changes tangible and relevant. The most effective presentations connect external trends directly to your organization's mission and challenges. Success stories that highlight instances where futures thinking prevented problems or created opportunities. These concrete examples help people see the practical value of foresight. The goal of awareness building isn't sophisticated understanding, but rather basic literacy and interest. You're helping people recognize that futures thinking is both valuable and accessible, not just for specialists, but for everyone. Second, skill development. With awareness established, focus on developing practical foresight skills throughout the organization. Different roles require different levels of capability, so a tiered approach is often most effective. Tier 1. Basic futures literacy. For most employees, focus on foundational skills like recognizing assumptions, spotting relevant signals of change, and thinking in longer time horizons. Short workshops, online modules, or team discussions can build these basic capabilities. Tier 2. Applied foresight. For managers, project leaders, and strategic roles, develop intermediate skills like trend analysis, scenario development, and futures-informed decision-making. These capabilities are best built through interactive workshops, coaching, and applied projects. Tier 3, advanced futures practice. For those in specialized roles, provide advanced training in systems thinking, horizon scanning methodologies, and facilitation of futures processes. This might involve external courses, certification programs, or mentorship from experienced practitioners. Regardless of the tier, effective skill development is practical rather than theoretical, focusing on application to real organizational challenges. Progressive rather than one-off, building capabilities through multiple learning experiences over time. Experiential rather than passive, engaging people in active futures thinking rather than just presenting concepts. Contextualized rather than generic, applying futures methods to your specific industry and organizational context. Remember that skill building isn't just about formal training. On-the-job application, peer learning, and continuous practice are often more powerful for developing real capability. Third, process integration. For futures fluency to become sustainable, foresight practices must be integrated into existing organizational processes rather than treated as separate activities. This integration ensures that futures thinking becomes part of how work happens, not an additional burden. Key integration points include strategic planning cycles where futures methods can enhance environmental scanning, challenge planning assumptions, and help develop more robust strategies. Innovation and product development processes where foresight can identify emerging needs, spot new opportunities, and test concepts against multiple future scenarios. Risk management frameworks where futures thinking can help identify emerging risks, explore potential disruptions, and develop more adaptive mitigation approaches. Performance management systems where futures-oriented metrics and objectives can be incorporated to encourage longer-term thinking and appropriate risk-taking. Meeting structures where simple futures practices like assumption checking or horizon scanning can be built into regular team discussions. The most effective integration approaches start with processes that already have a future orientation. Use language that connects with existing organizational priorities. Introduce futures practices gradually rather than attempting wholesale transformation. Provide clear guidance and tools that make integration practical. Celebrate and share examples of successful integration. This process integration transforms futures thinking from a specialized activity into part of everyday work, significantly enhancing its impact and sustainability. Fourth, cultural support. Even with awareness, skills, and process integration, Futures fluency won't flourish without a supportive organizational culture. Cultural elements that encourage futures thinking include leadership modeling of futures practices, where senior leaders visibly engage with uncertainty, explore multiple scenarios, and consider longer time horizons in their decisions. Psychological safety that allows people to question assumptions, raise concerns about potential disruptions, and challenge conventional thinking without fear of negative consequences. Learning orientation that values exploration, experimentation, and continuous adaptation rather than rigid adherence to plans. Temporal diversity that balances attention to short, medium, and long-term considerations rather than focusing exclusively on immediate results. Cross-boundary collaboration that brings together diverse perspectives to make sense of complex patterns and emerging possibilities. Cultural change is typically the slowest and most challenging aspect of developing organizational futures fluency. It requires consistent attention from leadership, reinforcement through systems and structures, and patience as new norms gradually take hold. Overcoming common barriers to futures fluency. As you work to develop organizational futures fluency, you'll likely encounter several common barriers. Let's explore strategies for addressing them. Barrier 1. We don't have time for this. In organizations focused on immediate deliverables and quarterly results, futures thinking often feels like a luxury rather than a necessity. To overcome this, start with time-efficient practices that can be incorporated into existing workflows rather than requiring additional meetings or processes. Connect futures thinking directly to current priorities, showing how it can address immediate challenges more effectively, not just long-term considerations. Create visible wins where futures practices lead to better near-term decisions or help avoid immediate problems, building credibility for the approach. Use the language of risk and opportunity rather than futures terminology, framing foresight as essential for current performance, not just future positioning. Remember that the perception of no time often reflects prioritization rather than actual time constraints. When people see tangible value, they typically find time for activities that previously seemed impossible to accommodate. Barrier 2. This is too abstract and complex. Many people perceive futures thinking as highly theoretical and inaccessible. To address this, use concrete examples and case studies that make futures concepts tangible and relatable. Start with simple frameworks that are easy to grasp and apply, gradually introducing more sophisticated approaches as comfort increases. Translate futures concepts into everyday language that connects with your organizational context rather than using specialized terminology. Create immediate application opportunities where people can use futures practices to address real challenges they care about. The goal isn't to simplify futures thinking, but to make it accessible through better communication and practical application. Barrier 3. We can't predict the future, so why try? This common objection reflects a misunderstanding of what futures work is about. To clarify, emphasize that foresight isn't about prediction, but rather exploring possibilities, challenging assumptions, and building adaptability. Reframe uncertainty as opportunity rather than threat, showing how futures thinking creates strategic advantage in unpredictable environments. Share examples where exploring multiple futures led to better decisions than assuming a single predictable outcome. Connect to complexity science and adaptive strategy concepts that are increasingly recognized as valuable in turbulent environments. When people understand that futures work is about navigating uncertainty rather than eliminating it, this objection typically dissolves. Barrier 4. Our industry doesn't change that fast. Some industries perceive themselves as relatively stable, making futures thinking seem unnecessary. To counter this, highlight disruptions in adjacent industries that initially seemed immune to radical change. Connect emerging trends to specific implications for your industry, making potential disruptions concrete rather than abstract. Use historical examples of companies or sectors that failed to anticipate significant shifts despite apparent stability. Start with incremental applications focused on gradual change before addressing more disruptive possibilities. Often, the perception of stability comes from looking backward rather than forward. Helping people shift their temporal perspective can significantly change how they view the need for futures thinking. Case studies. Building organizational futures fluency. Let's explore how two different organizations successfully developed broader futures fluency, adapting their approaches to their specific contexts and cultures. Case study 1, a financial services firm. A mid-sized financial services firm recognized that technological change and shifting consumer behaviors were creating both threats and opportunities. Rather than limiting foresight to their strategy team, they took a three-phase approach to developing broader futures fluency. Phase 1, leadership alignment. They began with their executive team, running a series of workshops that explored emerging disruptions, challenged assumptions about their business model, and created a shared vocabulary around futures concepts. These sessions helped leadership recognize the value of broader futures fluency and commit to supporting its development. Phase 2. Distributed Sensing Network. Next, they created a futures network of employees from different functions and levels who were naturally curious about emerging trends. These individuals received training in signal scanning and trend analysis and spent about 10% of their time monitoring changes relevant to their areas of expertise. Quarterly, they came together to share observations and identify patterns across domains. Phase 3. Integration into decision processes. Finally, they modified their product development, risk assessment, and strategic planning processes to incorporate futures inputs. Project teams began using scenario techniques to test new offerings against multiple possible futures. Risk assessments expanded to include emerging threats beyond traditional categories, and strategic reviews included dedicated time for exploring longer-term possibilities. The results were significant. The firm identified several emerging market opportunities months before competitors, avoided a major technology investment that would have been rendered obsolete by an emerging platform, and created a more adaptive culture that employees consistently rated as a key reason for their engagement. Case Study 2. The Government Agency. A government agency responsible for long-term infrastructure planning recognized that their traditional forecasting approaches weren't adequate for the complexity and uncertainty they faced. They developed organizational futures fluency through a different approach tailored to their public sector context. Starting with public engagement. Rather than beginning internally, they launched a series of public dialogues about the future of their region, engaging citizens, businesses, and other stakeholders in exploring different possibilities. This external focus created momentum and permission for futures thinking within the agency itself. Building capability through projects. Instead of generic futures training, they embedded foresight experts directly into project teams working on specific infrastructure plans. These experts provided just-in-time coaching and facilitation, helping teams apply futures methods to their actual work rather than in separate exercises. Creating a futures resource center. They established a small central team that provided tools, templates, and support for futures thinking throughout the agency. This team didn't do foresight work for others, but rather enabled others to develop their own capabilities through guidance and resources. Revising planning frameworks. Finally, they modified their formal planning guidelines to require consideration of multiple scenarios, explicit assumption testing, and adaptive implementation approaches. These changes institutionalized futures thinking in a way that suited their structured planning culture. Over 3 years, this approach transformed how the agency approached long-term planning. Projects became more robust against uncertainty, stakeholder engagement improved as multiple perspectives were visibly incorporated, and the agency developed a reputation for forward thinking that attracted talented professionals seeking meaningful public service. Measuring progress in organizational futures fluency. As you work to develop broader futures fluency, it's important to track progress and demonstrate value. Effective measurement approaches include capability assessments that evaluate the organization's foresight maturity across multiple dimensions, from signal detection to scenario development to adaptive implementation. Process metrics that track the integration of futures practices into organizational processes, such as the percentage of projects using scenario planning or the number of teams conducting regular horizon scanning. Participation indicators that measure engagement with futures activities, like attendance at futures-focused events, contributions to scanning networks, or usage of foresight resources. Outcome examples that document specific instances where futures thinking led to better decisions, new opportunities, or avoided risks. These qualitative examples often communicate value more effectively than quantitative metrics alone. Cultural indicators that track shifts in organizational mindset, such as the time horizon typically discussed in meetings, comfort with exploring uncertainty, or willingness to challenge assumptions. Most effective measurement approaches combine quantitative and qualitative elements, focus on progress rather than absolute achievement, and connect futures fluency to outcomes that matter to the organization. Next steps. Building your futures fluency strategy. As we wrap up our exploration of organizational futures fluency, let's focus on practical next steps for developing a tailored approach for your context. Assess your starting point. Use the dimensions we discussed earlier to evaluate your organization's current level of futures fluency. Identify strengths to build upon and priority gaps to address. Define your development goals. Based on your assessment, determine what level of futures fluency you want to develop, in which parts of the organization, and over what time frame. Set realistic expectations while maintaining an ambitious vision. Design your initial approach. Create a phase plan that combines awareness building, skill development, process integration, and cultural support. Start with high impact, relatively easy initiatives to build momentum. Identify potential barriers, anticipate the specific obstacles you're likely to encounter in your organization, and develop strategies to address them. These might include resource constraints, competing priorities, cultural resistance, or leadership skepticism. Establish progress measures. Determine how you'll track the development of Future's fluency and demonstrate its value to key stakeholders. These measures should align with what your organization already values and recognizes. Remember that developing organizational Future's fluency is a journey, not a destination. The goal isn't perfection, but rather continuous improvement in your collective ability to navigate uncertainty and shape the future rather than just responding to it. Looking ahead. In our next episode, we'll explore participatory Futures methods, powerful approaches for involving diverse stakeholders in co-creating futures. We'll discuss how these methods can enhance the quality of your foresight work while building broader ownership and commitment to emerging possibilities. Until then, I encourage you to begin developing organizational Futures fluency in your context. The organizations that thrive in uncertain times aren't necessarily those with the most sophisticated foresight methods, but rather those that have built Futures thinking into their everyday operations and culture. Thank you for joining me today. Keep developing, keep spreading Futures literacy, and as always, think forward.
Thanks for listening to the Think Forward podcast. You can find us on all the major podcast platforms and at www.thinkforwardshow.com, as well as on YouTube under Think Forward Show. See you next time.